After the massacre, humanity declared, civilization is no longer our constraint. The scanner showed 307 contacts. I blinked. Read it again. 307. Harmon looked up from his console, and his face told me he had seen it too. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that the number did not already say better. I was 3,000 km above meridian. My home. The colony where I was born, where my mother had planted tomatoes in red soil, where the air smelled like iron and rain. Most of the year. Population 1.4 million. Defense grid online. Atmospheric calibration in progress. Which meant I was up here instead of down there, which meant I was going to live through the next 11 minutes. I did not know that yet. The Keth fleet dropped out of fold space. In tight formation. That was the first wrong thing. Diplomatic convoy scatter on arrival. Because scattering signals you are not expecting to fight. These ships held their positions. 307 vessels locked, oriented already. Pointed at the planet below. Dresh, Harmon said. I see it. Should we? I see it, Harmon. I opened the emergency channel and started broadcasting. Colony Defense Command. Military relay at Vedi Point. The orbital platform above the southern continent. Every frequency we had. Nothing came back. Not static. Not a delayed response. Nothing. Like shouting into a room where the walls have been removed. The Keth did not announce themselves. No broadcast. No declaration. No warning shot, which was the galactic standard for signaling hostile intent. Before an engagement, the thing every species did because civilization required you to at least name the moment before you destroyed it. They gave us none of that. The first volley hit the orbital defense grid at 6:14 hours. I watched it on the scanner the way you watch something you cannot understand. Yet, the grid had 23 active nodes. In 14 seconds, all 23 went dark. I sat there counting them go out one after another, like lights in a building. At the end of the night. Except this was not the end of the night. This was the middle of everything. 14 seconds. I had helped design 2 of those nodes. I had sat in planning sessions for 8 months arguing about their power. Distribution. 14 seconds. Someone had given the Keth the schematics. I would think about that for years and never find the answer and eventually stop caring about the why. They're firing, Harmon said. His voice was flat, the way voices get when the brain has decided that feeling things is not currently useful. I looked at the scanner. I looked at Meridian. I was holding my colony ID badge in my left hand. I do not remember taking it out of my pocket. It was just there the way certain things appear in your hands during certain moments and you press your fingers into them because solid objects are the only thing that makes sense when nothing else does. Meridian Colony. Resident ID. Yal Dresh. The holographic seal caught the light from the console. The bombardment lasted 11 minutes. I am not going to describe what it looked like from orbit because I do not have words for it that would do anything except make you want to look away. I will describe the scanner instead. The scanner showed thermal signatures. It showed atmospheric displacement data. It showed a colony of 1.4 million people as a living, breathing data set full of morning routines and arguments and children going to school and workers finishing night shifts, and I watched that data set change. The numbers moved. Then they stopped. 1.4 million. The numbers stopped. 11 minutes. Start to finish. Harmon was crying. Completely silent, tears running down his face while his hand still moved over the console out of pure training. Habit, still running diagnostics, still doing the job even though the job no longer meant anything. I watched him and felt something I did not have a name for. Not grief. Grief comes after. This was the thing before grief, the moment when your body is still processing what your mind already knows. When you are standing at the edge of something enormous and you have not fallen yet. I was still holding my badge. Then the broadcast came. Keth High Seat, official channel Terran. Standard. They had translators ready, which meant they had been planning this, which meant this was not a war. A war has two sides. This was a presentation. The voice was calm and formal, the way the voice of power always sounds when it has already done the thing and is now explaining why it was entirely justified. The message was short. Meridian was a territorial incursion. Humanity would cease all expansion beyond the Vettori line. Further incursions would be met with further corrections. Corrections. They called what I was watching on my scanner a correction. I pressed my thumbnail into the holographic seal of my badge until I heard it crack. Harmon said, "We have to get out of range." I said, "I know." Neither of us moved for another 30 seconds. Then I flew us out of there because that is what you do. You move. You breathe. You do the next thing and the next, and somewhere in the middle of all that doing, reality catches up to you and takes you apart quietly, in pieces over months. But that comes later. The scanner read 1.4 million. I kept checking it the whole way back. The way you keep checking something you hope will change. It did not change. What a thing. The United Earth Assembly met 36 hours after the massacre. I was in the observation gallery above the main floor because I had asked to be there and because nobody in the chain of command had the energy to argue with me about it. I had not slept. I had not eaten anything that a reasonable person would call food. I had sat on a transport for 14 hours, watching the stars outside the window, and trying to remember what Meridian smelled like after rain. Iron. It smelled like iron and cold water. The chamber was full. Every seat on the floor occupied. 38 planetary delegations, 7 colonial representatives, 5 joint military councils, and in the observation section reserved for non-human diplomatic guests, 12 alien species sat watching with expressions I mostly could not read. Mostly. The Vessi envoy was readable. His name was Ambassador Doran, from a species known for the fact that they cannot hide what they are feeling even if they want to. Right now he looked like a man watching a door that had come loose from its frame, swinging open and shut in a wind he could not see the source of. I thought, good. Secretary General Akefer walked in and did not sit. That was the first sign. Protocol requires the Secretary General to be seated before the session is called to order. Every diplomat in that room knew it. Half of them were already checking their devices to see if a procedure change had been issued. It had not been. She simply stood at the podium and something in the way she held herself, not rigid, not performing anything, just perfectly still, made the room go quiet, faster than any gavel would have. She had been awake for 61 hours. I could tell by the way she was holding her own hands together in front of her, very deliberately, like she was keeping them company. She did not start with condolences. She did not read the death toll. She said, "We have decided what to put down." That was the entire preamble. Then she began to read the interstellar engagement protocols, every rule governing how human military forces were permitted to initiate contact with hostile vessels. Down. The Meridian Accords on Proportion. Response. The agreement signed by humanity and 14 other species that bound us to match force with equivalent force and nothing more. Down. The Joint Species Charter on Civilian Infrastructure Protection. The document that had been the foundation of every conflict humans had been involved in for 90 years. The agreement that said you do not target hospitals, water systems, power grids, schools. Down. Not because we were planning to target those things, because we were no longer willing to let a piece of paper define the full extent of what we were. She kept reading, document after document, agreement after agreement, treaty clauses, protocol subclauses, behavioral frameworks that human officers had operated inside since humanity first reached the stars. 17 items in total. She read each one by its full official title. She did not rush. She did not perform grief or rage. She read them the way you read the names of the dead, which is with total seriousness and no decoration at all. I was counting. In the observation gallery, I was counting the alien delegates as she read. The Yarvith military representative had gone very still. The Sithari trade envoy was leaning forward slightly. Ambassador Doran of the Vessi was no longer swaying. He had stopped moving entirely, the way certain animals stop moving when they have spotted something they do not yet know how to categorize. She reached the 17th item. Silence. Not the silence of shock. The silence of a room that has understood something and is sitting with the full weight of it. Then Secretary General Akafor lifted her head from the document, looked across the chamber and said it. Civilization is no longer our constraint. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The Galactic Charter projection hovered in the center of the chamber, the way it always did during full sessions, turning slowly in its soft blue light. 200 years of interstellar law. Agreements codified behavior. Every species in the galaxy had signed pieces of it. It was the thing that separated spacefaring civilizations from the simply dangerous. Nobody touched it. Nobody turned it off. It kept turning slow and blue while the room sat completely still. I was holding my cracked badge in my fist. I did not remember taking it out. I had 17 fragments of it by the time realized I had been pressing the edges into my palm for the past 10 minutes. On the floor below, a Keth liaison, present under diplomatic courtesy. Protocols that humanity had not yet revoked, stood up and walked out of the chamber. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a single word. In the gallery, a woman named Nina who worked in signals intelligence and who I had known for 6 years leaned over and said very quietly, "They are going to be Terrified, I thought about the scanner, the number that stopped. Good, I said. Nina did not respond. She was watching the blue charter turn. In the air. I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was, which was not yet fully a thought, more like the shape of one. That we had been very polite for a very time. That politeness had not protected a single person on Meridian. That the galaxy had watched us be polite and had mistaken it for the full measure of what we were. They were about to find out there was more to the measure. Not violently. Not immediately. Methodically. The way humans do things when they have decided to actually do them and are no longer interested in the process being neat or quick or admired by outside observers. After the session, I signed a preliminary reassignment order that placed me in command of Strike Group 9. The order was already prepared. That told me the military had known what Akafer was going to say before she said it, which told me this had not been a decision made in grief. Grief is fast and hot and it burns out. This was something else entirely. I took the group's initial briefing files and went to my quarters and read them for 4 hours without stopping. Owen, my second in command, came by once and knocked, and I told him I was reading. He went away. Harmon found me at 200 sitting on the floor with the files spread around me. He said, "You do not have to be in command of this." I said, "I know." He sat down on the floor next to me. Because that is what Harmon does. He matches your position. He lowers himself to where you are. It is the most irritating and the most decent thing about him, and it has always been both at exactly the same time. "I was there too," he said. "I watched it too." "I know you did. So this is not yours alone." I looked at him. He had slept. He looked like someone who had done a great deal of crying in a short amount of time and had come out the other side into something steadier. I did not know what I looked like. I had not checked a mirror since Meridian. "I am not doing this out of grief." "Harmon," I said. He waited. Grief would be easier. Grief is loud and it burns and then it is done. This is something quieter than that. He did not ask me to explain. That was the right call. I picked up the badge pieces from my pocket and set them on the floor between us. 17 fragments of my old ID. The holographic seal was dead now, just colored plastic. "I need a new one," I said. Harmon looked at the pieces for a long moment. "Commander Dresch," he said, giving me the title the way you hand someone something heavy when you want to make sure they have a solid grip on it. "Get some sleep," I told him. He got up and left. I put the pieces back in my pocket. All 17 of them. I read the briefing files until morning. I briefed Strike Group 9 at 700 on a Tuesday. 41 people. 2 rows in the main hangar bay of the carrier Aldrin, 3 days out from the Keth border. I had read every file. I knew their names, their records, their training histories. I knew which of them had family in the outer colonies. I knew which ones had been present at earlier incidents, the smaller ones, the kind the galaxy classified as accidents or border enforcement and filed under things that did not require a formal apology. I stood in front of them and briefed the mission. Veth Actual, the Keth command node that had coordinated the Meridian strike. Location, second moon of a gas giant at The edge of Keth-controlled space. Garrison of roughly 600. Defense network designed around 1. Assumption that any attacking force would follow standard engagement protocols. Approach on a cleared vector. Transmit identification codes. Respond to communication attempts. We were not going to do any of that. I walked them through the approach. We would come in using the gas giant itself as cover, burning hard on the side away from their sensor arrays until we were close enough that their response window would be too small to matter. We would use the Keth identification codes that our intelligence team had spent 6 weeks quietly collecting from their own communication relays. By the time their systems identified us as a threat, we would already be inside the perimeter. When I finished, I paused. Then I said, there is no second section to this briefing. Nobody asked what that meant. They already knew. Nobody looked frightened. What they looked like, all 41 of them, was people who had been carrying a weight they had no name for and had just been given permission to set it down. Not relief exactly. Something more specific than relief. The expression of people who have stopped pretending something is acceptable when it clearly is not. Owen stood to my right with his arms folded and said nothing. Former asteroid mining colony, 3rd generation. His family was the outer colonies, the whole category of them, every world they inner systems had built themselves on, without ever committing to protecting. Harmon was behind me. I had requested him specifically, and he had come without asking why, which told me he understood even if he was not yet. Sure, he agreed. We hit the burn point at 300 the next morning. The approach took 4 hours. I spent most of it in the tactical room, running the approach calculations again, even though they had already been checked 3 times by 3 different people. Checking them again was not useful. It was the only thing my hands wanted to do. Owen came in at hour 2 and sat across from me. You are checking the numbers again, he said. Yes. They are right. I know. So why are you checking them? I set down my coffee. Because the alternative is sitting here, thinking about what a Keth soldier looks like when they decide they want to live. Owen was quiet for a moment. Is that a problem for you? He asked. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. I thought about Meridian. The scanner. The number that did not change. I do not know yet, I said. That was the honest answer. He nodded and poured himself some of the terrible coffee, and we sat in silence for an hour and a half. The breach at Veth Actual lasted 9 minutes. We hit them with 3 actions simultaneously. Electronic noise on every frequency they used. A physical breach on the station's lower dock. A simultaneous strike on the power relay, feeding their long-range communication array. 9 minutes to shut down the nodes. Ability to coordinate, communicate, and respond. Gus took a hit in the 3rd minute. Not serious. He kept moving. Cal cleared the primary control corridor in under 4 minutes, which was 40 seconds. Faster than any simulation had suggested was possible, and he came back looking extremely satisfied about it, which was the most normal thing that had happened in 2 weeks. I moved through the station with Owen and 4 others toward the central command hub. We passed a Keth soldier in one of the interior corridors, young in the way a new thing looks new. He had his back against the wall, hands open at shoulder height, palms facing out. The submission posture. Standard galactic protocol. I had read it in the engagement manuals 100 times. I looked at him. I registered what he was doing. I moved past him. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. My team was 3 positions from the command hub, and there was a mission. Progress, and the mission did not have a step labeled stop and process this. I assigned Leon to hold the corridor and kept moving. Later I would think about that moment. More than any other moment in the whole operation. Not with guilt exactly. With a kind of distance, the way you think about something that happened to a slightly different version of yourself. The command hub fell. The Keth station commander's voice came over the internal intercom 40 seconds later. Terran standard. Clear and formal because everyone always had translators ready for us. Because humanity had been talking and negotiating and transmitting messages for 200 years, and the galaxy had learned our language without ever quite learning what we were. We request terms, the commander said. We invoke the Meridian Accords, Article 7, regarding the rights of a defending garrison 2. I checked the mission clock. It read 11 minutes and 4 seconds. I looked at that number for a long moment. I did not answer the intercom. Not as a deliberate decision made in that moment. The concept the commander was reaching for simply did not connect to anything operational in my current framework. Terms. The word for what happens when 2 parties are ready to stop. I had been ready to stop when they stopped over Meridian. I had been ready to stop at every point. In the previous 10 years, when the Keth had taken colonial assets and colonial lives and called it border enforcement, I had been ready a great many times. The node went dark at 14 minutes and 51 seconds. Mission complete. On the way back to the Aldred, Harmon came and stood next to me in the troop bay while the others secured their equipment and ran post-operation checks. He said we should have given them the chance to. I said, chance to what? He stopped. I looked at him. He looked at me. He was asking a real question. So was I. Neither of us was performing anything. We were standing in the actual space of the problem, which was that the set of coordinates we had both used to answer questions like this had been recalibrated 19 days ago by 11 minutes over a red soil world that smelled like iron and rain. Neither of us had finished remapping it. He sat down. I sat down. We rode back in silence, which was the only honest thing available to us. In my chest something hummed, quiet and steady, the way a well-built engine hums when everything is running correctly. Not rage. Not satisfaction. Something older and simpler than both of those. The thing that had always been there. Before civilization taught me to sort my responses into labeled categories and file them neatly away. I did not name it. I checked the mission clock again, out of habit. It read 19 minutes and 23 seconds. We were faster than they were. What a thing. The intelligence files arrived in my queue at 600 on a Thursday, 16 days after Veth Actual. My communications officer, Petra, sharp and quiet person who I had never once seen rattled by anything, handed me the package without making eye contact. That was the tell. Petra made eye contact with everything She looked directly at wall panels when she talked to them through her headset. The fact that she was handing me something while studying the floor meant the files contained something she did not want to be associated with having delivered. I told her thank you and she left. The files were transcripts, intercepted and decrypted communications from an emergency session of the Galactic Compact, the multi-species governing body that humanity was technically a junior member of. The session had convened 4 days after Veth Actual. The agenda item was listed as the human situation. The human situation. I poured cold coffee into a cup and sat down and read. The session had opened with the Yarvith military delegation requesting the floor. The Yarvith were an old species, respected with a military tradition going back 800 years. Their delegate, a general whose name translated into Terran standard roughly as Deep River, presented a summary of humanity's actions over the preceding 19 days. 3 Keth command installations neutralized, 2 Keth military relay stations removed from service, 1 Keth forward supply position taken apart in a series of strikes so precisely timed that the Keth response teams kept arriving at the previous location instead of the current one. No human assets lost. No human personnel lost. No civilian Keth infrastructure touched anywhere. The chamber was very quiet while Deep River read the summary. Then the debate began. They went through categories, methodically, the way the compact does. Everything. Insurgency. No. Insurgencies are asymmetric and disorganized, and the human strikes had been precise, sequenced, and clearly coordinated from a central command. Terrorism. No. The targets had all been military. There were no broadcasts taking credit. No demands attached, no performance for a watching audience. Conventional warfare. No. No territorial claims. No occupation. No visible endgame that fit any standard definition of what a war is trying to achieve. The Sithori trade representative asked carefully whether humanity might be classified as having become feral. Feral. I read that word 3 times. Feral meant reactive. Feral meant driven purely by instinct, unable to reason past immediate reaction. Feral was the word for things that had once been organized and had lost that organization and gone back to something simpler and less reasoned. I sat with the word. Then I kept reading. Dr. Sam of the Vessi spoke next. He had been in the observation gallery during Akafer's declaration. I had watched him go still. In the transcript, his opening statement was noted at 41 seconds, which in Vessi diplomatic terms was extremely brief and meant he was either very certain or very alarmed or both at once. The translation from Vessi formal register into Terran standard loses most of the nuance, so I will give you the flattest possible version of what he said. Humanity had not become feral. Feral creatures act on reflex. What humanity had done was the opposite of reflex. It was the most deliberate act a species could perform, the deliberate identification and removal of its own chosen constraints. Not a collapse. Not a loss of control. A decision made collectively, publicly, and with complete awareness of what was being set aside and what was being retained. They kept rules. That was the part that frightened him. That was the part that should frighten everyone in the room, he said. Humanity was still not targeting civilian systems. They were being meticulous, careful, and consistent about what they did and did not do. That meant they were not acting without thought. They were acting with complete intention. And they had chosen this. We have not been in a war, he said. We have been in a hunt. We were the prey and we convened committees about it. The session transcript noted a 7-second pause at this point. 7 seconds of silence in a compact session was the diplomatic equivalent of someone overturning the table. Then the session broke into 3 simultaneous arguments that the transcript stenographer had done their best to capture and mostly had not. From what I could piece together, 4 species wanted to open immediate diplomatic channels with humanity and offer full Keth reparations. 2 species wanted to discuss collective security response, which was the compact's polite language for acting together against someone they had collectively decided was a problem. Deep River of the Yarvith said nothing for the remainder of the session. Ambassador Doran of the Vessi said one final thing near the close. He said they are not doing this because they are angry. They are doing this because they made a choice, and they are a people who keep the choices they make. I read that line 4 times. Then I set the transcript down and drank my cold coffee and looked at the wall. For a while, there was a second document in the delivery, the formal compact communique addressed to the United Earth Combined Forces. Command structure, full Keth reparations, reconstruction funding for Meridian, where the coordinates were Meridian used to be official compact censure of the Keth, high seat, colonial rights restoration and expansion beyond the original Vetori line. Every demand humanity had placed on the diplomatic table in the years before the massacre, and several things we had never thought to ask for. At the bottom of the communique, added by the compact secretariat without being asked, was a single additional clause: formal acknowledgement that the Meridian colony strike constituted a war crime under interstellar law. They named it 2 months too late. They named it what it was, the simple and honest naming of a thing, the thing we had been asking for since before the scanner went quiet, and they had found the courage to do it only after the math changed on them, which meant it was not courage at all, but a very sensible calculation. I did not respond to the communique that day. I walked to the tactical room and found Owen standing at the display table, running through updated Keth fleet positions. The Keth had been contracting over the past 2 weeks, pulling back from the border line in movements that were not quite a retreat, but were very clearly not an advance, something testing the edges of its own caution. We got an offer, I said. He looked up. Everything we asked for: reparations, reconstruction, Meridian named officially. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, what does Okafor say? Have not heard yet. This came in this morning. He looked at the display. The Keth positions contracted and cautious, pulling inward the way something does when it has genuinely reconsidered the situation it is in. They are scared, he said. Yes. Is that enough? I did not answer immediately. Not because I had no opinion. Because I had not decided yet whether my opinion was the right instrument to be applying to that particular question. Harmon appeared in the doorway. He had the look of someone who had been rehearsing something. Command wants a response recommendation. From the strike group by 1800, he said. I looked at the fleet display. The contracted border. The quiet where 600 Keth officers used to be. Write it up, I said. Tell command we await Okafor's position, and if she recommends accepting. I set down my cup. Then we will have a conversation about what accepting means. Harmon wrote that down and left. Owen went back to the display, running his fingers along the projected border line tracing the gap the Keth pullback had opened up. It was almost large enough to put a whole world inside. It was almost exactly the size of Meridian. On my desk in my quarters, the communique sat unanswered. Beside it, the new ID badge command had issued me 3 days earlier. Commander Yale Dresch. United Earth Combined Forces. The holographic seal was perfect and clear and entirely uncracked, the kind of perfect that new things are before life puts any real pressure on them. I had not put it in my pocket. I did not know why. Or I knew, but did not have a word for it yet that I was prepared to use. In the closing language of the compact communique, the formal line that every diplomatic document ends with, the translator had rendered it as, we trust that humanity, as a full member of the interstellar community, understands the value of the frameworks we build together. I read that line exactly once. Then I closed the file. The stand-down order came in at 300 on a Wednesday. I was alone in the tactical room. The Aldred was running night shift. Protocol minimal crew on deck, the kind of deep quiet that large ships settle into when most of the people inside them are asleep and the engines are doing their work without being asked about it. The order arrived in my queue like any other message. Standard command formatting. Flagged urgent. Keth high seat dissolved. Compact enforcement active. Full cessation of hostile operations. Effective immediately. I read it. Read it again. Then I sat there for a while. 19 days. 23 operations across varying sizes and scopes. No human forces lost. Significant Keth military capacity gone. A multi-species governing body that had been watching from behind its charter for 200 years had seen something it did not of a category 4 and had made the very practical decision that making us whole was less complicated than the alternative they had begun to imagine. We had not threatened anyone. We had not issued demands. We had simply demonstrated what we were capable of choosing and let the galaxy do the arithmetic. I thought, is this a victory? I thought, what does that word actually mean? I drank cold coffee and watched the mission clock on the far wall reset to midnight, which it had done automatically when the stand-down order was received. I had a habit by this point of checking the time at 11 minutes exactly every day, the way some people mark midnight. Not out of grief, out of accuracy, because 11 minutes was the true measure of something, and I did not want to let myself forget what the true measure felt like. The clock ticked to 1 minute. I turned off the light and went to bed. I did not sleep, but that was normal. Now, I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling and listened to the Aldred's engine hum, that deep and steady vibration that large ships make when everything is working correctly, a sound that after enough time starts to feel like the ship breathing. In the morning, I signed 17 documents, post-operational reports, personnel commendations, equipment requisitions for maintenance, the formal confirmation that strike Group 9 was stood down in compliance with the cessation order. The last document was the reinstatement of the rules of engagement. 37 pages. I had read every page of it 100 times over my career. I knew every clause, every subclause, every carefully constructed sentence, outlining how human forces were and were not permitted to conduct themselves in conflict with other spacefaring species. The document I had operated inside for my entire professional life. I signed it in 9 seconds. I did not read it. The words were the same. They had always been the same. The question was not what the document said. The question was whether the person holding the pen was the same person who had held it before, and if not, whether that mattered, and if it mattered, what to do about it. I put the pen down and moved on to breakfast. Owen found me in the mess at 7:30. He sat down with his food and said, "Command wants a group briefing at 1100. Transition protocols, reassignment, orders." I know I got the same message. Gus wants to know if there is going to be leave. There will be leave. He will be very happy about that. Gus is always happy. It is his defining characteristic. Owen smiled at that, small and quick. He ate for a while. I ate. The mess had about 12 people in it, and most of them were having the same quiet, tired breakfast, the kind you have after something has ended and the next thing has not started yet. Leon came in, got his food, sat at the far end of our table, said good morning to us both, and then looked out the porthole at the stars. That was Leon. He processed things by looking at them from a distance. He had been doing a great deal of star looking over the past 19 days. Harmon arrived last, as he always did, because Harmon slept completely and without apology and woke exactly when his alarm told him to, and not 1 second before. He sat down next to me with a cup of actual hot fresh coffee, and I looked at it with what must have been an obvious expression because he pushed it across the table to me without a word. We sat there, the four of us, eating breakfast on a ship that was no longer at war, in a silence that was not uncomfortable but was definitely full of something. Harmon said, "What happens now?" A simple question. He meant it simply. What is on the schedule? What does transition look like? What does command want from us next? But simple questions sometimes carry extra weight because the simple version and the larger version are using the same words. Owen looked up from his plate. Leon turned from the porthole. I looked at the borrowed coffee. The compact wants a formal response to their offer by end of week, I said. ACAFR is in negotiations. Reconstruction of Meridian site begins with a planning committee. The Keth border gets redrawn. We get the colonial access we were asking for before. Everything we wanted, Owen said. Yes. Before Meridian. Yes. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Harmon said quietly, "And the rules of engagement back in place as of this morning." He nodded. He looked like he had more to say and was deciding whether to say it. "I signed them," I said before he could frame the question. 9 seconds. Harmon looked at me. And I thought about that word. And such a small word for such a large space. Between two things. I know what the words say, I said. I have always known what the words say. The question is whether knowing them is the same as being inside them the way used to be. And I do not have the answer to that. Yet, Harmon nodded slowly. Owen said, do you think we did the right thing? Direct question. Owen always asked direct questions. It was one of the things I valued about him and one of the things that required me to sit very straight and think very carefully before I answered. I think we did the necessary thing, I said. That is not the same as the right thing. No, it is not. Leon had turned back from the porthole. He was watching me now with that patient, measuring attention he reserved for distant things. The compact historians, he said. They had all read the transcripts. Petra had distributed them to the whole group. They are calling it the human correction, the same word the Keth High Seat had used for meridian. I know, I said. Does that bother you? I considered it. Actually considered it, gave it the honest time it deserved. It should probably bother me more than it does, I said. That is the honest answer. We finished breakfast. The 1100 briefing was routine. Reassignment orders, transition, timelines, leave schedules. Gus was indeed very happy about the leave and also about his post-operation commendation, which he read 3 times, and then folded very carefully into his jacket pocket. Cal had produced a card game nobody had heard of and talked 4 people into a corner table with him. The normalcy of it was almost strange. The way a quiet room is strange. Immediately after a loud noise, I watched them and felt something I did not try to name. In the afternoon, I drafted my personal report to command. Operational summary, performance of Strike Group 9, tactical recommendations for future doctrine based on what we had learned. Standard format. I had written perhaps 60 reports like it over my career. I wrote it in 2 hours, read it through once and submitted it. Then I sat there. The new ID badge was on the corner of my desk where it had been for 4 days. Commander Yale Dresch. United Earth Combined Forces. The seal was clear and bright and perfect, the kind of perfect that new things have before life puts any real pressure on them. I picked it up, turned it over. The colony of origin field read, Aldred. Carrier group, which was not a colony, was not a world, was not a place with soil or air or people who planted things in the ground and called it home. It was the most accurate information available. I set it back down. Harmon knocked and came in without waiting, sat on the chair across from my desk without being invited, which he had done since the first week I had known him and which I had long ago stopped commenting on. Okafor's address is tonight, he said. 200 our time. Full broadcast. I know. She's going to talk about rebuilding. About the path forward. He paused for a moment. About what we are going back to. Yes. Are we going back to it? I looked at the badge. The question was not really about the rules of engagement or about specific policies or treaty frameworks. The question was about whether the thing we had reached for during those 19 days, the thing we had found and used and been effective with, whether it stayed where we had reached for it from or whether it had quietly moved forward and taken up residents somewhere closer to the surface. The galaxy had been terrified of us. Not of our weapons. Not of our numbers. Of the fact that we had looked at our own chosen constraints, understood exactly what they were and what they cost us, and made a deliberate and collective decision to set them aside. That terrified them more than anything we had actually done. Because a constraint you place on yourself you can remove, and a species that knows how to remove, it will never look quite the same as a species that does not know. I do not know, I said. Harmon looked at me. That is the honest answer, I said. And I would rather have an honest answer. I do not like than a comfortable one. I made up to sleep better. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I was not expecting. Meridian smelled like rain. I looked at him. After the monsoons. That iron smell. You could stand outside and breathe it for a while, and it felt like something was being washed clean. I had not spoken about what Meridian smelled like. I had only thought it on the transport. 14 hours after the scanner went quiet. Yeah, I said. It did. We sat there with that for a while. It was the first real thing either of us had said all day. Outside the porthole, the stars were doing what they always do, sitting perfectly still at enormous distances and giving nothing away about what they have witnessed. Akafar's address aired at 200. I watched it alone in my quarters, sitting on the floor with my back against the bunk, which is where I tend to end up when I am thinking about something that matters. She spoke for 40 minutes. It was a good address. She spoke about Meridian, named it, directly named the population, said 1.4 million clearly and without softening it. She talked about what the compact had formally acknowledged. She talked about reconstruction. She talked about the path forward, and she used the words healing and restoration and rebuilding, and I sat there and let those words reach me and tried to find where they connected. Inside me, they connected somewhere, not as close as they would have before, but somewhere real. She did not speak directly about what we had done. She did not need to. Everyone watching already knew. She talked about what we were and had always been, which was a people who built things and made choices and honored what they chose and paid what they owed. Near the end, she said, we have not abandoned who we are. We have reminded ourselves of the full range of what we are. That is a different thing. I played that line back. Then I turned off the address and sat in the quiet of the room. The badge was on my desk. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about the compact historians, calling it the human correction and not seeing what they had done by choosing that word. I thought about Dr. Sem going still in the gallery. I thought about Ambassador Doran stopping like something that has just understood the situation it is in. I thought about 307 ships in 14 seconds, and a number on a scanner that stopped moving. I thought about the hum in my chest, the quiet engine of it, the way it had felt like everything working correctly. I thought about Harmon sitting down next to me on the floor of my quarters in the dark, matching my position, lowering himself to where I was. I thought about Iron Rain. I got up, picked up the badge. The seal was perfect, uncracked, clear. I turned it over once, twice, then I put it in my pocket. It sat there, solid and present, the way things feel when you are carrying them instead of holding them. Different weight distribution. More settled. I did not know if I was the same person who had carried the last one. I did not know if the person I was now would make all the same calls I had made during those 19 days, given the same circumstances. I thought probably yes. I thought possibly no. I thought the fact that I could not answer that with certainty was itself an important piece of information that I was not yet sure what to do with. But the badge was in my pocket. And tomorrow there were reconstruction committee assignments to review and leave schedules to approve, and a long, careful, methodical conversation to have with the galaxy about what came next. A conversation we would have at our pace, on our terms, with our full understanding of who was sitting at the table and what each party present was capable of choosing. We had put the door down. We had won with the door down. The door was still there, leaning against the wall. We had not put it back yet. Maybe that was the work now. Not the operations, not the strike coordinates and the mission clocks and the approach vectors. The choosing. Every day, every signed document and approved order and diplomatic reply. Each one a small and deliberate act of picking the door up and deciding, again, freely to build the frame around it. Not because we had to. Because we were the kind of people who chose things. And we were choosing this. For now, Harmon knocked at 600 and said there was fresh coffee. I said I was coming. I checked. And GT,